Again, he is raised in Germany, born in Germany, interested and been raised to learn and deal with German affairs, had to marry this English woman, right, for children and some sort of diplomatic arrangement. Obviously, he knows more than we do about that arrangement, but the sense is that he cares very little about British affairs. He doesn't appear to be of much consequence. He doesn't trouble himself with tricky political questions that the peers are interested in. You can sort of see him as a human standing above ants going, why are these ants, these peers, so interested in moving that little piece of apple, right? He doesn't get it. These affairs don't seem important to him. For instance, right, the question of which Protestants are better than other Protestants does not really trouble George I all that much, okay? As a personality, he's also really austere and rigid. He avoids all the pomp and position of being king. His reign sees no scandal or glamour. He's not even interested in mistresses. Jeez. Okay? He sees no need to become English. He never learned to speak the language. He prefers his native German. He ignored or failed to recognize the differences between peers and the next level of aristocrats. How dare he? Okay? Because those peers work hard to be peers, right? He lacked a regal aura. He avoided ingratiating himself to his subjects. He treats the throne as another job. It's his son where things start to change mildly, though not significantly.
Was it George the First or George the Second where he kind of like created a committee or something to like handle a lot of issues because he was too into gambling and stuff to worry about the politics?
Not George the First or George the Second. We'll get to that later. Okay. George the Second, like his father, is really neither all that brilliant or all that ambitious. He's shy, he's private. He also spoke poor English. He's the last British king born outside of Britain, again, born in Germany. But here's the difference. He rules from 1727 to 1760. And so if we're looking at this analytically, not in terms just of like a, hey, what's happening with the monarchs, but socially, analytically, we get a very different scene. If we look at this analytically, socially, we see that from 1714 to 1760, the monarch doesn't really matter. And that's a really huge win for who? For Parliament, who is going to use this 45-year period to really establish their authority and influence, to put their stamp on British government. And it's really this period where we talk about Parliament coming into its own, not just being a group that counsels the king anymore, but actually having real authoritative power, real financial clout, as we'll see in a second. We sometimes call this then the reign of Georgian stability. Obviously that changes with George III, who inherits, right, a whole series of problems in the American colonies and elsewhere, okay? But for George I and George II, there's this long period of peace and stability with no grand goals or no achievements, where they carry out their job responsibly and capably, where they make all the necessary military appointments and support the civic life of the British, but allow essentially Parliament to run most of the government. The most important trend of George I and George II is this unimpressive, steady progress that gets made. And while that seems kind of, weird to talk about, I don't need to spend much time on these kings, because what's really happening is in the other areas of British governance. That isn't to say, though, that there aren't a wide range of enemies that are emerging to challenge the authority of this new arrangement. Let's not call it the new monarchy, okay? But this new arrangement, this emerging constitutional monarchy. This indifference invites enemies, one might say. Okay? Both of these kings spend a decent portion of these 50 years fighting off small subversive movements from a group we're going to call the Jacobites within England and Scotland. You should have read about the Jacobites a little bit for today. Anybody know what the Jacobites are or who they supported? Go ahead, Colin.
They supported the last Stuart kings, and they were also generally pro-Catholic.
Yeah.
They wanted to restore the Stuart kings.
Good.
And disestablish the Anglican Church. And
that's great. That's a great start. Let's start with that, okay? Very smart. First of all, they supported that old line of Stuart kings, and when Colin says Stuart, he's referring to James II, right? Before the Revolution. You remember that there was that James III character that Ethan mentioned earlier. Now, he doesn't become a king. I kind of picked on Ethan for this. You know what happens to James III? The great
He lives in exile in the court, the French court, and
Yeah.
he's called the Old Pretender.
The great or the old pretender. That's right, because he is pretending to be king of England. Pretending to be king of England over there. Okay? In France. I'm giving you a hard time. Okay? Makes sense, right? So our Jacobites then are composed of a wide range of groups that maybe sort of support a restoration of the old order. Okay? And so these 45 years are filled with people, especially our older peers, who remember the old order and who long for a return to it. Because they're standing in the face of a German king, right, who doesn't speak English, and his son who don't seem to care all that much about the affairs of the peers. Make sense? Okay, so let's build a little laundry list here of groups that might have made up this collection we call the Jacobites. Obviously, our Catholics came up for Holland, right? Let's put them down as number one. Many of our Catholics support a return to James II himself, a very staunch Catholic. Good. Who else might support Jacobinism or Jacobitism?
Tories.
The Tories. Why the Tories?
Because they're anti-Whig.
Yeah, because they're anti-Whig. That's a great start. And the Whigs are going to be in control for 50 years, right? But they also support a really strong monarchy. And what did James II believe in? You remember?
He believed in religious tolerance, which is why he was
That's
disliked
right. That's
in
right.
England.
That's right. But that's sort of
Well,
along
Catholic,
the line.
Catholicism.
Absolutism, right? He believed in absolute authority for the king. Okay? Believed in absolute authority of the king. So it turns out that many of our Tories were kind of secretly holding Jacobite connections. Their political goals kind of overlapped, and as they became to despise the Whig parliament of which they had to serve as minority or back row figures, they built some connections with Jacobite forces. Okay, so Catholics and Tories. Who else?
You should be even say Presbyterian.
Yeah, we could definitely say the Scots. Okay, in fact, many Jacobite attacks on the Georgian kings were launched from Scotland itself. Okay, very good. Let's expand that Presbyterian to other dissenters too. Okay, other dissenters, and we might even, of course, add the Irish, who, as Catholics, right, felt that a return to an older Stuart order might be in their favor. Okay. All right. So the Whig Party has the support of George I, but there's all of these sort of weird Jacobite forces that are sort of clandestine and potentially challenging this newfound allegiance between king and parliament. Our Tories are worried that they're stuck with a dull king that's not going to assume the charge of building a powerful monarchy. Okay? Now the Whigs only kind of fan the flames of this opposition. They're not keen to really dismantle it as much as they are to antagonize it, because they are incredibly vindictive when they first take over Parliament. When George first calls Parliament in 1715, the spring of 1715, our Whig leaders outright and boldly attack the Tory opposition. They force many of them out of office by technicalities, right? They order George I to review their estates, which essentially puts them under scrutiny, okay? Forces them to go back home and make sure their affairs are in order back home rather than participating in the cultivation of the larger nation. Ian, question?
Wasn't a reason for that because one of the Whig leaders found that one of the Tory party members sent letters to a Jacobite?
Oh yeah, there are all sorts of stuff, right? Our Whigs are incredibly suspicious that our Tories are not only like supporting these Jacobite rebellions and writing letters to France, as you suggest, right? But are also actually supporting them, funding them, allowing them to stay in their home territories, right? As they potentially launch plans to attack the Georgian alliance. These Whigs are pretty ruthless. And so it's not as if, right, our Tories are kind of the enemy here, in as much as they are challenging this newfound order. What we have are two parties that are operating on 15th century military rules in an 18th century world. Okay? All right. With this Whig ascendancy in Parliament, we get a chance to again break down the structure of British government. We're gonna do this a lot in the kind of early days, okay, to make sure our terms are correct, make sure we know what social groups we're talking about. Again, for many of you, this is kind of a foreign language. You spend all your time learning about the checks and balances and three branches of American government, that it can be hard to sort of imagine a democracy that functions differently. Is that fair to say? Yeah, I mean, I know you all are smart, but we gotta kind of understand how this is different from the American system we've been learning from age 2, okay? All right, so before we get started here, right, before we discuss the shape of this emerging constitutional monarchy, anybody give me a sense of what Parliament itself looks like, either now or in the past? Oh, Kalisha?
All white men.
All white men, yes, good. That's an excellent recognition. They are all men and they are all white. Okay, smart. We'll start there. Structurally, how many houses are in Parliament? Do you know? Mary Rachel?
2, the House of Lords, House of Commons.